University. I direct the Oral History Master of Arts program here at Columbia. Tonight's event is part of our year-long series on oral history and the future. So we're thinking about the idea that all oral histories are a conversation about the past that's happening in the present and that's oriented towards the future. And we're thinking about all the different ways that that future orientation is made real. And sometimes that might mean putting oral histories into an archival repository where future researchers or users can come and look at them or listen to them. It might mean telling your story to someone to have them actually take it into their body and remember. Or it might be activating oral histories for social change and trying to shape the future by having those stories circulate in public in meaningful ways. And that's really what the focus of tonight's event is. We're so thrilled to have Voice of Witness back. I think it's actually been a couple of years since we've done a Voice of Witness book launch, but we've done many over the time that I've been curating this series. I especially think of Refugee Hotel, which is an amazing photography and oral history book that really highlights how the work of Voice of Witness has been path-breaking in editing oral histories for a public audience in a way that's compelling and novelistic almost, as you said, but that's also really grounded in important truths and facts and a sort of critical framework of human rights. One of the things I love about the series is that they treat human rights abuses not as something that happens out there somewhere else in the world, but as something that's really core to American society as well. And I think that's a really powerful thing to bring that framing home to us. So a little bit more formally, we have 3 speakers here with us tonight, and I'll tell you a little bit about each of them. Cliff Mayotte. Mm-hmm. Both were wrong. Currently serves as Education Program Director for Voice of Witness. Cliff compiled and edited The Power of the Story, the Voice of Witness Teacher's Guide to Oral History, which I highly recommend, and co-wrote and edited Say It Forward, a guide to social justice storytelling. He's also a recipient of the Beverly Keys Educator Award from the Society of Professional Journalists. Lauren Taylor, right, here she is, oral historian and psychiatric social worker, is an adjunct professor at the Columbia University School of Social Work, and we're very proud to say an OHMA alum from our very first cohort in 2008. Lauren has been on staff since 1994 at the Service Program for Older People, a mental health clinic for older adults, and has a private practice. As an oral historian, she has conducted dozens of life history interviews both in the United States and abroad, and is studying the subjective experience of aging through the medium of narrative in a cross-cultural context. And I'm going to keep nagging her to publish that work. She has lectured and published on the therapeutic use of narrative. And then finally, Tran oversees the Voice of Witness book series as managing editor. Before coming on staff at Voice of Witness, Dow was senior editor at Haymarket Books and a freelance book editor. She's an old school lefty who is passionate about social justice and democratizing the kinds of stories being heard, and finds a curiosity about our world essential. I'll mention that tonight's event is part of the Paul F. Lazarsfeld Lecture Series, and we're grateful for that support. And I'm going to pass around a sign-in sheet in case you're not on our mailing list and you would like to be. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our speakers. Thank you so much for coming from far and from near to be with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll kick this off. My name is Cliff. I'm the Education Program Director for Voice of Witness. And kind of what brings all of us together, other than the wonderful invitation from the Columbia Oral History Master's Program, one of the things that we're focusing on and celebrating tonight is sort of, you don't usually have book launches for textbooks or guidebooks, but in this case we're definitely making an exception because the book that we're kind of focusing on tonight is called Say It Forward, a guide to social justice storytelling. And for Voice of Witness, it's an opportunity for us as an organization to not only demonstrate our learning, because every couple of years we collaborate with so many different people, and we're so fortunate to have so many amazing partnerships and collaborations. We want to share some of these ideas and partnerships with other people, definitely. And we also want to inspire people to conduct their own oral histories and share their own stories. And what does it mean for you and your communities or your classrooms to amplify unheard voices, and what does that look like? And so we want to do whatever we can to inspire other people and to provide some practical tools and strategies for doing that. So that's part of the celebration for tonight. And for Lauren, Lauren's coming from just down the street. Part of the book, Say It Forward, has a series of, we don't call them case studies, we call them field reports. And because case study felt like a little too formal for us. And so the field reports are folks who are reporting on oral history projects, many of them that are still in progress. And so we wanted to get a range of projects and actually having folks that have no oral history experience, some with a little bit of oral history experience, and some folks with a lot, to report on what they're doing in their projects. And instead of just saying, this all went great, this was fabulous, this was a fantastic project, it's people really being honest about what worked and what didn't. And so hopefully we're creating space for people to actually learn from other oral historians. So part of the book is a DIY guide for social justice storytelling, and part of it is sort of an oral history about conducting oral histories. So hopefully folks will find that useful. And I know there's books out there in the hallway, so you can avail yourself of a copy of Saying Forward. So what we're going to do, we're going to really look at, as Amy was saying, looking at the relationship between art and social justice, and really looking at the aesthetics and the ethics, and kind of how those intersect and how they merge, where some of the tensions are, and kind of some of the strategies that we've incorporated and we've used, and also have an opportunity to open this up and learn from all of us. And so it's going to be a really kind of rough and tumble interactive couple of hours. So we'll get into the details of it for a moment. But what we'd like to start with is sometimes we forget that in this work that we do as storytellers and oral historians, Lauren was saying earlier, we were talking with the class, and Lauren was saying, oh, this is a very human endeavor. We get all involved in the, like the research or this or that, and kind of looking at, quantifying and qualifying and field reports and all this stuff, and we forget that, like, oh, we're actually, we're mammals in a room, experiencing, stories together. And we forget sometimes the intimacy and the vulnerability. That's part and parcel to this work that we do. And so what we'd like to start with is like, oh, I'm going to have to be vulnerable and intimate. We want to ask all of you just to turn to a partner, turn to somebody close to you, or maybe it's a group of three, however it works, and we'd just like you to take about a minute or 2 minutes each to share a story of your first name. Okay? Share a story of your first name. It doesn't have to be the origin story of your name. Many of us don't know what those are. Right? And an example, you can use your gamer name, right? We had a student that we worked with who was like, I don't want to know my real name, but my gamer name is so much more interesting to me. It could be a nickname. It could be anything you want, but a story of a nickname or your first name. Okay? So take about 2 or 3 minutes to do that, and we'll try to, sometimes this is hard to manage because people just don't stop. I just want to apologize in advance by saying by stopping people in the middle of a story, it's antithetical to everything we believe in. So just apologies in advance, okay? So turn to a partner or a small group and share a story of your first name. clap twice. All right, a lot of middle school teachers here. All right, excellent. That was actually, I'm a little disappointed. That was easier than I expected. But thank you for doing that. Before we jump into our next piece, would anybody be willing to share one or two small details about what they learned about a partner's first name? If it's okay with your partner, of course. Like one quick little detail?
Yes.
Anybody? Yes.
What I really liked about Rebecca's story is that she shared that she did not get an inherited name into her, I guess, this generation of her family lineage, because her 22-year-old mother was determined that she would not be inheriting a name from an ancestor.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. Thank you. One or two more quick ones. Anybody is willing?
Am I allowed to say yours?
Yeah.
Used to be known by his initials, CJ, because he didn't like Cliff, but then he grew into it. And now we're both.
And pretty soon I'm just going to be Clifford. That's where this is going. Okay, no, there's another hand. Yeah.
I learned that Ronaldo was almost named Coy up until the very end. Coy McClinton, Coy, C-O-Y, and that's his middle name.
So, okay, it's like we're keeping both.
Yeah, they came to a compromise.
Good plan.
And this is 90, and she was named by not her mother and father together, but her aunt, because mom was feeling very ill after she was born, and dad was feeling very anxious, and so he turns to her aunt, and the aunt said, he said, what should I call her? And she just named her that. And her mother then said, when mother goes up to her, how did that happen? And she's, because my aunt named her. Started for life.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for engaging in that. Maybe that was the last thing you expected to be doing when you walked in. But I appreciate you jumping in and being willing to do it, because a lot of times in this work, we're so busy doing the work that we don't think we have to participate in the work and be kind of that, open and vulnerable, and kind of be willing to, to ask. We ask our narrators to do so much, and it's just like, who are we? How are we showing up in this work that we do in any kind of storytelling or narrative or teaching or whatever? And also, it's just kind of a teeny illustration into, just doing this for 2 minutes. It's like somebody, maybe you know them well, maybe you don't know them at all, but it's like you share just a tiny story or a snippet of a story, and we start to occur to each other a little bit differently, which I think is really, really powerful. And we take what we're trying to do in this work, all of us, is like that small kernel writ large. What does that look like? What does that feel like? So thank you for jumping in on that. And now the more formal portion, where we're just going to talk and talk and talk. No, that's not true. All right. So we just want to put a little bit of a frame on some of what we're going to do in the next 45 minutes or so. And as we mentioned earlier, it's kind of the idea of looking at art and social justice and storytelling for social change, and looking at the ethical realities and the aesthetic considerations, and how we manage both. And certainly we'll be talking a little bit about that in relation to the work that Voice of Witness does, and also Lauren's going to talk about it a little bit in relation to her work. We're also going to look at different examples of kind of art and social change, and have people kind of grapple with, like, well, how do I feel about that in terms of the balance of ethics and aesthetics, right? This is art, we're calling it art, and kind of like looking at kind of sometimes the tension that exists between the two. And sometimes that tension is very generative, and sometimes it's debilitating, and can be an imposition, to be polite. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of examples of that. We're also going to have a little bit of time to kind of interrogate and poke holes in some hypothetical oral history projects, and kind of look at, and we're going to break you into groups. We have 4 quote-unquote case studies, and you're going to work in groups of 4. I don't know how we're going to do this, but we're going to do it. Into groups of 4, and kind of look at the opportunities and challenges of each of these projects. And one person from each group will kind of be the reporter or note taker, and then you'll report back what your findings, what you see are the opportunities and challenges in that particular project, in the hopes that for all of you that are engaging in oral history projects, storytelling projects, narrative projects, kind of thinking about all of this stuff before the project ever happens. Because we always want to jump to that first interview. Right, here we go, let's do it. But there's so many other things, there's so many considerations before we get to that point. And so we're just going to dabble in that a little bit as well in our time, right? But Dow is going to, we're just about to, what did I forget? Oh, okay.
Did you want to do that? No. We can start.
Oh, right. Right. No, we should just start. I was going to read, it's like, I just thought it'd be really cheeky to like do a reading from a guidebook. But I'm not going to. But the section I was going to read was called Oral History and Social Justice. And kind of we tend to just sort of, we put the two together. It's almost like, oh yeah, of course. But in the short section I was going to read, it kind of very, hopefully mindfully, kind of looks at like why the two are connected and what makes them so inextricably linked and how they have been that way for a long time. But you can just imagine the powerful prose that I would have read. But you can read it in the book.
Here we're just going to show an example very quickly, highlighting one of the narratives in our book, Solita Solita, which is about young, unaccompanied refugees from Central America who made their way to the United States. And Soledad is featured in this.
I don't choose to come here. I didn't have another option. I was suffering poverty. I was physical abuse. Basically, I didn't have another chance to come here. We come here to survive because in our country there's no way to survive. Come here to take our jobs, or they come here to do bad things, or take advantage of the country. We just come here to get educated and have a better life. It's exciting to know that other people will read my story. I think writing your own story is a way to healing. Every time I'm sad or I feel like giving up, I look my story and I say, wow, all the things that I have come through, so I can do it. This is only a bad day, this is only a bad week, and I can get up and continue my life. Having like being able to share my story, this inspired me, and I hope it will inspire others as well.
So one of the key things for me about that, all the work that we do is really starts from the central idea that the experts, the people who know what, we're talking about projecting into the future, how society needs to change. The people who know that best is not necessarily an outside investigator or a journalist, but someone who's actually had direct experience themselves. And we can call it flipping the script, you can call it recentering voices that have traditionally been marginalized. And that's something that is at the heart of oral history and what we try to bring out in some of the stories and collections that we do. So I don't know if there was...
Yeah. No, I think kind of part of it, you can ignore the campaign part of the video. We're not trying to turn this into a fundraiser. But I think kind of looking at Soledad's video as an example is kind of like, for what we can do tonight is looking at every step in the process from conceiving of the project, thinking about the project, whether it's Solito Solita or something else, and the conception of the project all the way up through conducting interviews, editing, partnering, all the way up through the public sharing of the story, and kind of looking at each step in that process and how we need to be mindful about each and every step. And one of our collaborators and partners, Lauren Markham, who wrote an amazing book called The Faraway Brothers. I don't know if anybody's read that book. But she says the process through which we document a story is as important and powerful as the story itself. And so that's kind of, I think, what we're getting at in this work, and I think in Soledad's video, and also to Dow's idea around kind of flipping the script, and how, how we collect those stories, how we gather those stories, and what it means to share them publicly and not have them solely archived somewhere where people don't have access. And so that's a lot of about the work that Voice of Witness does. And with that in mind, Lauren's going to talk a little bit about her project, Resilience, working with elders in East Harlem. And in this particular project, in this work that we do, and it's also in Say It Forward, there are ideas like looking at very particular essential questions and ethics around oral history, around the process of gathering stories is as important as the story itself. And Lauren's going to talk a little bit about her project and sort of referencing some of these key points and ethics and essential questions around oral history.
Should I read for Mr. Prince?
Absolutely, yeah. So we'll turn it over to Lauren.
Okay, before I do, I'm going to actually read part of one of the interviews I did, because it really speaks to this whole insider-outsider question, and I found this slide, this photograph, which I think really captures maybe how I was feeling when I first came into this project. Before I start, though, I just want to thank friends and family who are here, and 3 people who are here with whom I wrote a book chapter. We wrote a book chapter for a book called Narrative and Social Work Practice, which I'll talk about later. That's not the book, but the crossover with my 2 professional hats, because I came to oral history through clinical social work with older people primarily. But let me just dive right in and read the beginning of this interview. It was the end of the day at the Leonard Cavello Senior Center in East Harlem, and most of the seniors had gone home. The only people left in the lobby were the young Latino man who sits at the reception desk, the custodian, a Latino man in his 50s, an African-American senior named Malcolm Prince, referred to respectfully by the others as Mr. Prince, and 2 Latino elders sitting on the periphery. Mr. Prince was talking to the receptionist. I had just come downstairs after interviewing another member of the center. I became a participant observer, an insider-outsider, as I both joined the conversation and recorded it with permission. Mr. Prince, this is just a piece of what he said. Down in the Army, it was segregated. It was all black companies and all white companies. And when I had my first furlough leave, it was like 250 of us going from Tallahassee, Florida to Jacksonville to catch the main line to go up north. And the colored waiting room could hold only 50 people. And it was only a train coming in, a special train coming to pick us up at Tallahassee to take us to Jacksonville. It was about 11 at night, and some of the white waiting room, there was nobody sitting over there. I went over and the sergeant told me to leave. I said, "You don't know my name? You address me as soldier." And we were fighting Germany and Japan. He took his gun out and put it to my head and said, "I ain't got time to go to court filling out papers for killing a nigger. Now don't ask me a stupid question like, did I get up? Did I get up? Of course I got up. I mean, you're talking to me right now, aren't you? So there you go, I got up." And then I'm going to skip over some. I asked him about race relations in the neighborhood that he lived in East Harlem. And I asked him what the biggest challenge was that he had faced in his life. And he said, "The biggest challenge? I look at life not as a challenge. I don't look at life as a challenge. I look at life just like this gentleman upstairs told me. It's a journey." Mr. Prince then turned to me and said, "You know what you should ask people? You know the question you should ask people? You should ask them what they regret." I had, in fact, asked him that question earlier, and he said he had no regrets. He had answered to that question just like the man upstairs on the 2nd floor said, "Life is not a dress rehearsal, it's a play in progress." Then the receptionist said, "Mr. Prince, what do you regret? Tell us what you regret." Mr. Prince used his hands to make the imaginary form of a woman and said, "You guys heard of Cialis?" The receptionist and the maintenance man said they had not. Mr. Prince swaggered up to where he pictured an imaginary woman standing like this. He swaggered up and said, "You know, you can see this beautiful woman standing and, you know, hey baby, you want to," and he made a gesture with his hands. The reception, and she said, but then you get there and nothing works. The receptionist and the maintenance man seemed perplexed. One of the two older men on the side said, Viagra, and the others understood. At that point, I went out on a limb and asked the receptionist, who had a computer on his desk, to look up the 36-hour Cialis commercial video on YouTube. It's a takeoff on a commercial for this medication, and it features a tall, smartly dressed African-American man with an enormous erection, which knocks into things, causing all kinds of havoc. The last scene shows him in an embrace with an elegant woman in an elevator, and the door closes on his erection. All the men in the lobby gathered around and laughed when they saw that on the screen. Afterwards, Mr. Prince said to me, so you're not who I thought you were. I thought you was one of them church ladies, but you ain't no church lady. That's right, I said, Mr. Prince, you got it. So here I was, middle class, educated white woman going into a senior center in East Harlem, and I had no idea how I would be received. I had no idea whether people would want to be interviewed. I had created a flyer and the staff had talked to people, and people really did want to tell their stories. They weren't sure what it was, but I think this idea of insider, outsider, who can speak for whom, really is a question that speaks to the writing and the presentation of a project like this as well, because I recorded people's stories, and then what happens to them? So then they became part of a book chapter, and that's the process of editing. And there was a lot of editing to do because the transcripts were, 30, 35 pages long for these interviews sometimes. And so who decides what goes in and what doesn't? So first I had to decide, and I wrote what I thought, and then there was a lot of back and forth. So I wondered if you could just talk to the process of editing and how you decided what should be kept in there.
Are you talking about for
Say Forward, yeah.
in particular?
Yeah, well, it was really difficult because there was a lot of great material, and thinking, in Lauren's chapter, the stories, it's hard to edit personal narrative. It's amazing, and I think one of the things that was difficult for me is in Lauren's chapters, I was at the senior center today, and I felt like I'd been there before, even though I'd never had, and it was just, and that spoke a lot to the narratives that were part of the chapter, and it was really hard to trim them down and get them has to be so many pages, and so there's I felt like there was an emotional connection. There were the technical choices, but there's emotional connections related to editing oral history that I think are very different from other kinds of editing. But also I think in thinking about editing, it's like you start and there's this wonderful buffet, and there's all this stuff on the buffet. It's like, I can eat all of this. And then eventually you start to edit and you start to go, well, I don't know that I need that, or I'm not quite hungry for, and it's just...
I just want to interrupt to say that my chapter for the other book that I did on narrative and social work is called Sharing a Narrative Meal.
Well, there we go. And so that, if I kind of kept that in mind, that was useful. But in Lauren's chapter in particular was a challenge, because the narrative excerpts were really, really powerful. So.
And I think one of the things that came across in doing these interviews and then looking at the whole collective of interviews were the themes that emerged, and this is why I called my chapter Resilience, because although Jay, who's taking the photograph, said he doesn't want to hear that word from me anymore because I've used it a lot. And he took pictures this afternoon too when I talked about it. But at the end of every interview, I asked each interviewer, what message would you give to young people going forward? And they all said, stay in school, get an education, because these were people who never had an opportunity for that. Very, very few of them did. Other themes that emerged were things around community and the sense of identity and allegiance to the community. I mean, East Harlem, when most of the people I interviewed were growing up, was a neighborhood that was very rigidly divided by gangs. There was the Irish section, the Italian section, the black section, etc., and then the Latino section as well. And people reported having to leave school 10 minutes early so that they wouldn't get beaten up on the way home, being sent to school with pocket money, but just some of the amazing things that families did to survive. I mean, many times their families were broken apart by some of the difficulties that they faced. But the other thing in terms of community, today we did this presentation at the senior center, and the room was filled with people who were participants at the senior center, and there were some slides that I showed with photographs of old Harlem, the way it was when they were growing up, and just the outpouring of enthusiasm when we had photographs of La Marqueta, which was this marketplace that was a meeting place for families and for people to come and buy anything they needed. And it's gone. Now it's been replaced by a sort of, you know, upscale version of it. But I think that in terms of the insider-outsider, I was very fortunate because I was eventually accepted into this community, so that when I came in, the receptionist knew me, and the maintenance people knew me, and the participants knew me, and I just felt very much at home there, although I was also very aware of the fact that I was not part of the community. So.
Yeah, there were just like incredible, just, you know, recognition and gasps, you know, when Lauren was sharing these photographs of the neighborhood back in the day. So we're gonna shift gears a little bit. We're going back and forth kind of between aesthetics and ethics, and we're gonna look at some of the aesthetics related to storytelling for social change. In some cases, very, very connected to personal narrative and oral history. In another case, kind of a bit of filmmaking, kind of like flipping the script, like literally, you know, quote unquote subjects of a film making the film themselves and kind of sharing the story. Dow has curated the sort of mini aesthetics ethics film festival here in our time together. And as you're watching, you know, thinking about, we'll have time to debrief. We're going to save a lot of time. We're going to do, like I said, sort of the interrogation of a project activity. We're also going to have time at the end to really hear what people experienced in looking at these films and looking at kind of the, you know, how you felt about it, how you're looking at, you know, its effectiveness as a piece of art, and also looking at it, well, is this ethically, is this a choice I would have made, or is this somehow, is this choice diminishing, you know, one or the other, or is there a sacrifice of ethics for creativity, or is there a sacrifice of creativity for ethics, and kind of looking at those, and it's never really cut and dry, and so it's really, I think, useful to look at that and realize that this tension does exist in our work, and it certainly exists in our work at Voice of Witness, as we're taking, as Dow and others described, a novelistic approach to editing and shaping oral history.
So yeah, we thought also it would be fun to do this little sort of listening, watching party together.
Yeah.
When you get to do that? A bunch of like-minded folks. So, you know, our preference is, you know, the literary written genre, but also love these clips for all different reasons.
Do you want to say what your clip is?
Oh, yes. So this one is called The Box, and it's about a youth in solitary confinement. It goes through his story. So that one is probably the longest one. After that one, I'll show one called, it's a clip from a film called Finally Got the News, which is about the League of Revolutionary Black Workers who essentially made a film about their work, their struggle within the factory. This was in the late 70s, early mid-70s to organize in the auto factories in Detroit. And then the final one is a StoryCorps animated short called Facundo the Great, which connects a little bit back to our first name exercise.
There we go. Ooh. That's all I can do from here. But you get the idea.
Being in the box as a teenager, it took a toll on me mentally. Why would you want to put a kid through this? medically diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 13. I had to witness her go through chemotherapy and radiation treatment. So, you know, my mother lost all her hair, all of that stuff. So, you know, at the age of 13, you know, that took a toll on me. My grades started to decrease. I guess you could say I linked up with the wrong crowd. At the age of 15 was actually the first time I was actually put in handcuffs. I was arrested, brought to the precinct and everything. At the age of 16, I was remanded to Rikers Island. When the bus came, they had to shackle you. So that ride was just a lot to take in. Driving past places like I used to hang out. So I'm looking at the places that I used to hang out and I'm just like, oh my God, it ain't hit me yet until we started going across that bridge to Rikers Island. So when we started going across that bridge, I was like, what did I get myself into? I'm really going to Rikers Island. So we coming in, everybody looking just new in the face. So one of the kids I saw, sneakers that I had on, he was like, oh, word, you got on no new joints? Or you come to 3 million, those is mine. And I'm just like, oh man, they gonna try to jump me for these sneakers, but you know, I had to answer back. Like, oh yeah? I was like, I'd like to see you get them. Well, I'd like to see you come get these joints. Just being in there, your mom becomes your own worst enemy. You know, you start to feel bad about yourself. You're like, oh, I'm in this box, I'm in this box. I'm in here all day, every day. If it's the summertime, it's uncomfortably hot. A couple of the letters that I had from the moisture of it being so hot, like the ink was running off the pages. Your eyes, you know, start to play tricks on you when you start seeing black dots. Your eyes is just following them around in the cell. You're trying to escape seeing the black dots, but you can't. It could drive you crazy. Because even the conversations in the box aren't normal conversations. When you repeat everything twice, if you're screaming at somebody all the way down the head, you know, you have to scream, hey yo! They're like, what? I ain't hear you! I ain't hear you! So there's so many people that have been in that cell and screamed on that same gate, it smells like a bunch of breath and drool. So you're in the box pacing back and forth talking to yourself about everything under the sun, having a full-fledged conversation with yourself. Oh yeah, son, yeah, da-da-da-da, I told you, like it's normal. It's not. You develop social, emotional problems behind being in a box. People who have tried fake suicide attempts to get out of the box. So what some people would do is take a battery out of their Walkman and they, you know, tuck it in their rectum. If you can't clear the metal detector, you can't go in the box. When they take you to the infirmary and you get the x-ray, they say that that's kind of a suicide attempt because the battery can explode on you. You could die. But if you try to commit suicide, they take you out the box. I wouldn't say that any teenagers deserve to be in a box. You know, I'm a teenager. I shouldn't have to be dealing with all of this. I'm a kid. Like, I'm a kid.
Mean streets, even when it's free, it ain't cheap. All go inside the terminal dock.
Okay. This is the finally got the news clip.
They give you a little bullshit amounts of money for working, wages and so forth, and then they steal all that shit back from you in terms of the way you got his other things set up. This whole credit gimmick society, man, consumer credit, buy shit, all credit. He give you a little bit of shit to cool your ass off, and they steal all that shit back with shit called interest, the price of money. Motherfuckers are non-producing, non-existent, it's these motherfuckers who deal with paper. There's a cat who was telling me he's in mining. And he sits in an office, man, on the 199th floor in some motherfucking building on Wall Street, and he's in mining. And he has paper, certificates, they're embroidered and shit, stocks, bonds, debentures, obligations, he's in mining. And he's sitting up in Wall Street and his fingernails ain't been dirty in his motherfucking life. He went to Phillips Andover or Exeter, he went to Harvard, he went to Yale, he went to the Wharton School of Business, and he's in mining. And the motherfuckers who deal with intangibles are the motherfuckers who are rewarded in this society. The more abstract and intangible your shit is, hey, stocks, what is stocks? A stock certificate is evidence of ownership in something that's real. Ownership. He owns and controls and therefore receives, the benefit from. That's what they call profit. He fucking with shit in Bolivia, he's fucking with shit in Chile, he's Kennecott, he's Anaconda, he's United Fruit, he's in mining. He's in what? He ain't never in his life produced shit. Investment bankers, stock brokers, insurance men, just motherfuckers who don't do nothing. We see that this whole society, man, exists and rests upon workers, and that this whole motherfucking society controlled by this ruling clique is parasitic, vulturistic, cannibalistic, and is sucking and destroying, man, the life of motherfucking workers, and we have to stop it because it's evil.
Finally got the news. And now, what's the book that's connected to that?
The book, there's a book about the same group called Detroit, I Do Mind Dying.
For some reason you think this is a game. This is not a game, Will.
I think it's the other one.
Look at you.
This is sort of a mashup of all of them.
One with the heart.
Oh, it's the story for one, but it's not the right thing. Okay. Sorry.
My name, when I started kindergarten, was Ramon. And by the time I was in the second grade, everybody was calling me Raymond. Out the playground, in the classroom, Raymond, hey Raymond, hey Raymond. And so you're trying to adjust to this, you know what I mean? And if there was a girl named Maria, her name became Mary. And Juanita became Jane. Till one day, we got a new student by the name of Facundo Gonzalez. Facundo Gonzalez. When he came to school, we noticed they called it emergency administrative. What are we gonna do with this guy, man? You know what I mean? How are we gonna change his name, you know? And one teacher goes, well, you know what? Why don't we try to shorten the name a little bit? And they go, yeah, well, but how do you spell it? Facundo. Well, why don't we just spell it F-A-C? And one teacher goes, well, that means his name would be Fock. And that sounds to us like a dirty word. You can't be saying, Fock, where's your homework, you know? Where's Fock? That was a kid we always remember going to elementary school. Because Facundo was the only guy that never got his name changed.
Right. So finishing there with Facundo the Great. Whoops.
There we go.
Finally got the lights turned off. Now it's over. Oh. Is that right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Nice. And so, well, do you want to talk a little about the aesthetics of all three? Or should we?
No, I feel like we can save that for the Q&A, unless someone feels like they want to jump
Immediate reactions?
in and talk about what you were thinking, feeling about what you saw.
I found the piece on teens in the box like really emotionally hard. And I was just so heartbroken for as little 16-year-old who was not even convicted of a crime to be put in a situation where he's walking through Rikers Island and he's already being targeted for theft. And I thought about how those shoes were the one thing that he was walking in that felt he was connected to. It's a Jordan. I was thinking about the brand, the impact of the brand, what it means to have a Jordan. The ability to fly, the ability to dream, the ability to vision and have ambition to step out of your current circumstance. And so, I don't know if we're going to go into it, but I would love to know the impact of it.
Of that piece
Yeah.
in particular? I'm not actually really sure. I mean, I'm not sure how broadly it got disseminated. I mean, I always think that CIR, Center for Investigative Journalism, they do amazing work. And to me, this was a really interesting take on trying to figure out how to get it to be something that more people would see. And, you know, connect it was like graphic novel-y, you got to hear his voice, but I know that some people also have criticisms of that form. And so, you know, that's something I think is really useful to grapple with. You know, what did we think was effective, not effective? Go ahead.
Well, I mean, looking at the three of them, I think the content really should determine the form. And here we had this first, which is a very difficult thing to hear about, but we get it in graphic novel form. So that helps us hear it. The second one, you had archival audio, I assume, because it sounded a little grainy, but then you also had grainy film, which I thought worked well together. And then finally, a child's story told in cartoon form. So with each three, I thought the content determined the form, and I think we should approach things that way.
I thought it was really interesting that like the first and the last one were so different from each other, but I felt a huge difference between them and Finally Got the News. I think the difference between something that was made directly, like hands-on, by the people affected. Am I right? Like that's a documentary that was made by Detroit workers, and that it felt like the first two felt like they had been so carefully processed to make them like palatable and engaging, whereas the middle one felt a much, you know, I never want to say anything's unmediated, but it felt much more direct. Yeah.
Well, we can certainly come back. We'll come back to this, but as you see, it's you know, looking at aesthetics and ethics and mediated, unmediated, curated, and people have different definitions even for those terms, like what that even means to them. And so there's a lot to grapple with in this work around, you know, especially storytelling for advocacy or social change purposes. So with that in mind, we're going to jump into a more interactive thing here. And we have hypothetical, maybe not, I don't know. Basically, we have 4 quote-unquote case studies, and I don't know how we're going to break into 4 separate groups. Maybe we'll just do it geographically and try to, you know, east, south, northwest, quadrants of the room. And if we can enlist one person in each group to kind of, or maybe 2 people to kind of be a note taker, so you can kind of capture the essence of your discussion and then report back to the rest of the, you know, the entire group. And so basically what we'll do is when you get into each group, you know, obviously you'll read the case study, you know, listen to it, and then kind of look at, and these are kind of the main questions to address just to get you started. Obviously, many other questions, many other thoughts will come to you as you're discussing this. But looking at these oral history projects, it's like what you're looking at, like what are the main challenges and possibilities in this project, right? So those are 2 things. And what opportunities does it present for an exploration of ethics in oral history? So looking at the opportunities and challenges, just, you know, and possibilities of the project, and then looking at some of the ethical, you know, an opportunity to explore the ethics. And I think the reason we say that is kind of like, so often when we work with folks, and we do a lot of work through our education program, supporting schools and communities with their own storytelling project, it's like, you know, so often people say, should we do this project? Should we do this? And they're like, we're not going to help you decide if you do it or not do it, but we want to encourage you to be very, very mindful and inclusive in the process. And then after that process, you can determine whether or not you want to do the project, right? So anyway, this is an opportunity for us to do that. So, quadrants. Let's do quadrant 1 over here, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4.
I wonder if you might have more than one group working on each case study, so people could have smaller groups.
Sure.
I don't know if it's possible.
We don't have enough.
Okay, no.
Oh, no, I have a couple. Maybe.
It's up to you. I feel like it's going to be
Very
like
hard to learn.
too crowded and loud
Yeah.
to discuss in the.
Any ideas for how to reorganize our space?
Let's see. Here's what we ought to do. Okay, we're going to improvise here. Okay, so from like where you are right now, this and over here, this is a group. That's a group. So kind of arrange yourselves, get close, get intimate. Okay? Why don't we do this? What if we split, the folks sitting in chairs back there, what if we just split you in half? Yes, from you over, that's a group, and from here, that's a group, and then from this side of the table over here to the wall, that's another group. Yeah?
There's a few more chairs up here too. If anyone
And yeah, okay, I'm going to come around with the case studies. Okay. There's a couple more if you want to read some. So here's a case study. All right. Okay, I'm going to go out there. Do you want to read this case study for the folks over here?
Hi. Okay. Over there. Who doesn't have one? Hello. Okay, so I guess over there. Yeah, we're like in the section here. Are you all?
So the situation is you and several colleagues. You and several colleagues work for an Australian human rights organization. You have been given a grant.
I could read this out loud, and that everybody
Volunteers to
Okay.
by the Australian government's policy of mandatory detention.
You're a narrator for a previous Voice of Witness book detailing the
Individuals who are
experiences
still being held
of women in U.S. prisons.
Your
You
potential
found the oral
narrators
history
speak
process
a
healing
variety
and
of
would like to
languages.
embark on
You
the
would like to
oral
create
history
an
project.
exhibition throughout Australia,
You have been
publish a
many
book,
times.
collect
But you have never been an interviewer yourself.
That being said, what will be the main challenges and possibilities?
Wow. This friend agrees to introduce you to an organization that supports women dealing with the impact of domestic violence. So that's the opportunity. So,
we can pass it around.
yes, we can pass it around. So basically, you're the one that's done it.
Oh, you have a grant. Okay, that's good. You have
And if there's very few that actually I know it's not the same thing.
I mean, I guess my first question.
Could be a tough project for volunteers too.
I think there has to be a huge desire to cover
As you say services, I turn it from when you say, dozens of people, instead I say I am. That kind of stuff.
There's one more copy. There's one more copy.
There is a really don't have a problem with having a male person leading this this job because men as males that has gone through domestic harassment feel more comfortable speaking to a woman than to a man. Confidence or no.
Are you saying that you or your mom do it?
Well, maybe an issue for them that's going to be harassment. And just to have just bias against all men, she's the person that has a brother number
This is something on New Orleans. It really engages people in what is violent thinking of human rights.
That's a really great question.
Your orchestration.
But I question why she wants to drag her, or she or he wants to do it. Just because they've been involved in at your son's and trying to give yourself something to do interesting. Planning, not always. So I no, we don't really know why this person is trying to that's the goal. Right. But that's the one to have you.
What I understood from it is that you're trying to do like a what's combination.
Yeah.
Or the general trying to advocate for education. I guess that's the first thing that I came to. But that's why I was asking like what the government situation. Like will they allow us to be very explicit and like criticizing this, or how would this like be yeah, where does it come from? That's what I was going to ask. Where does it come from? What are we trying to do right now?
So I know there's lots more you can discuss. So I know we're just getting to the tip of the iceberg. Just take one more minute. I know it's the confines of the room and it's not conducive to this small group work, but you're doing a beautiful job. So just take one more minute and then we'll do a quick report back. So just kind of try to finish up.
The other one that was trying to like combining our thoughts like gender. Like, I think I really have questions for all around how like
government
Just pull out things. Oh, I know some of those.
First person.
And the person that she's talking to is the one
If anyone's interested in this, actually, I seen a radio documentary with Australian artists about women migrant petitions. Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, her reveal that even if her investigative reporting on there is
Okay, everyone. Okay. Sorry again, interrupting you in the middle of a good story. Not good. So I know it was hard to hear each other and hard to kind of, and in some groups just like having one copy. I thought, oh, it'd be great. We'll have enough, it'll be intimate enough. But so it's a happy problem. So thank you for kind of like leaning in and trying to hear each other and trying to participate in this. So we just want to take a moment again. Just having a couple minutes is kind of the tip of the iceberg. But hopefully you get a sense of some of the things to discuss, some of the things to wrangle, some of the processes for approaching this work in an ethical way, and thinking about some of these projects too have some aesthetic ideas sort of built into them too. It's like, well, how are we going to share that story? What's what's going to be generative, right? What's going to be communicative, or how can we mainstream these stories for a wider audience, for advocacy purposes, right? So if we could just have one person from each group just kind of maybe stand up and read the case study, and then read just kind of a few of the highlights of the opportunities and challenges that you came up with in this super short amount of time. So, can we start back here? I feel like a superhero. Here! Can we start back here?
Okay. Case study. Students at a local high school are chronically truant, and there has been a uptick of arrests of teens. Many of the teens hang out at a local youth center where they work on breakdancing, beats, spoken word, and wall art. You were given a grant to interview youth at the center in order to figure out how to get them back into school. Their interviews are scheduled to be published in a school district-wide report. So some of the challenges we came up with was we wanted to be very transparent in what we were doing. We wanted the students to remain anonymous, so they could, not be called out or anything. And we thought that having, to distribute the power, have a means of co-creation. So this way, we can create together, and we're distributing the power evenly. So we're not just taking that away from them, and maybe they'll want to engage the school and their studies. Let's see. We thought also we would want to ask them why they would depart from school, so we can get firsthand interviews and get to the core of the matter instead of just assuming why they left school. So we really want to hear it from their mouth. We thought we would like them to come speak about their art as well. This is kind of like an educational tactic too. They can share also stories maybe from their artwork. Maybe they could engage where the purpose of why they're doing this, or just certain stories. Sometimes street art, there's a lot of stories behind it, maybe from the community or their culture. So we thought they could just speak firsthand about these things. And that's about it.
That's it? You got to a lot. Okay, wonderful. Can we come to this group up here, quadrant? I don't know what you want to. Okay. But yeah, so reading the case study, and then a couple of the opportunities and challenges.
Okay. I have such a supportive group. Alright, so you and several colleagues work for an Australian human rights organization. You have been given a grant to organize a group of volunteers to collect oral histories from individuals who have been directly impacted by the Australian government's policy of mandatory detention for asylum seekers. You hope to interview a wide range of people, including individuals who are still being held at one of the detention facilities. Your potential narrators speak a variety of languages, and you would like to create a roving exhibition throughout Australia and publish a book of the collected oral histories. So,
That's a lot.
I know. So with a project like this, one of the things we talked about initially is how much planning and preparation would have to go into it, especially working with volunteers. Another thing is obviously the language barrier would be an obstacle. Translators, making sure that you keep the translations as authentic and accurate as possible. We were also talking about the difficulties of communicating with people who are going through legal issues and how that may affect them in their process of the outcome of their case. So that's an ethical issue. And yeah, roving exhibition, being somewhere in a public space. We spoke a little bit about aim and intention, and how you affect the audience that you're looking to speak to. So any other things? Grant, and most importantly, an obstacle may be, where did the money come from? It's always important. Who's giving the grant? What do I have to do?
Yeah, exactly. Great, thank you. Okay, we're gonna have to jam. We're getting short on time. Let's go back here. Can we go back there? Okay, just a couple of quick highlights.
Oh, okay. You have recently left a career in the oil and gas industry to join individuals and activist organizations protesting the construction of the KXL pipeline. You would like to create and publish a collection of oral histories that you would hope to serve as an advocacy tool. You would like to represent a wide range of people and communities directly affected by the pipeline, which includes homeowners, community leaders, and law enforcement. You have never conducted an oral history interview, and you are quite nervous about talking to strangers. Okay, so I just kind of collected a few of our thoughts, and they're not fully formed. But yeah, the idea of being kind of a whistleblower and an oral historian, like an oral historian, my apologies, conducting it in your position as that person. We talked a lot about trust and holding trust, gaining trust, and maintaining trust. We talked about occupation of land, especially with natural resources and people who have lived on that land before we do, or we might not have. Challenges can be like technical and skill-based hesitations. So how do you record something? How do you conduct a proper interview? And more about trust, establishing friendships with one or two people that are really secure, so you feel like you have a good connection to the people. Creating tools of advocacy, and then the question of who is this for? Who do you want this final project to be for? Especially because there's kind of 3 people already mentioned, and you want to kind of create community within that. And then choosing the correct form to represent those things. So we talked about watching the videos and kind of how the KXL pipeline is not the proper way to probably do it in animation, but kind of
Right. Wonderful. Thank you for trying to capture that
Yeah.
lightning in a bottle so quickly. Okay, we have one more group here. So if somebody could read the case study and some of the opportunities and challenges, just a few of them. In the
Okay,
interest of
great.
time.
Would you like to read the case study and then
Sure,
I'll
I'll
jump
read
in?
it. You are a narrator of a previous Voices of Witness book detailing experiences of women in U.S. prisons. You found the oral history process healing and would like to embark on your own oral history project. You have been interviewed many times but never been an interviewer yourself. Based on a conversation with a friend during your son's football game, you decide to focus on stories of women who've experienced domestic violence. This friend agrees to introduce you to an organization that supports women dealing with the impact of domestic violence.
Okay, great. So, oh, that's right. So one of the challenges that we found with this particular project is that we want to have a clear goal. What are we working towards? What is your name?
Selena.
Selena brought that to the table, and so Selena wants to know specifically where does she need to go with this project? Who is her audience? What's the demographic? And what is the impact that she wants to affect? The other the other obstacle that we're coming across with this particular proposal is that we don't even understand the actual purpose. She spoke with somebody at a football game, and that in itself can be a very catalytic place to get an idea, but we would like for her to have more purpose in her approach to this particular project. And lastly, we also would like to have a little bit more information on how she will consider gender and how the impact of gender plays into this role of interviewing. It is a project where she's focusing on domestic violence. She is going to a women's shelter, so we also considered about what would be the impact of women-to-women violence in a lesbian couple. Is that the right word to use? Am I using the right word? Lesbian? Yeah? Okay. So I just think it's very, so for us, we just felt that gender is a very important tool here, and we need to be aware of how gender and power interact in this particular opportunity.
Also, Claude mentioned the language, because as a woman, I just saw this woman talking, but the language is so careful. There is no gender identification of the person who's going to do the interview.
If I could say a word about language, because the very first person I ever interviewed is here in this room, Steve Abrams, who was grandfather of Amnesty International, and one of the grandparents of Amnesty International, his wife. But because I interviewed him when I was in the OHMA program, I had to also transcribe my interview and annotate it. And that was part of a project that I did. And I had the opportunity, because I know Steve, to go back and talk to him about his reflections on the interview, which I then wrote up. And one of the things that happened was that I put in parentheses laughter many times, because it seemed to me that that's what was happening. And Steve said, no, that's not laughter. And I said, well, what is it? What do you call it? He said, it's a chuckle. And I said, to me, a chuckle has a very different meaning. It's kind of like, not really very serious, or I don't know. So we kind of came up with that was the way Steve punctuates his speech. But just a simple thing like interpreting laughter, I really had to think about that. So.
And thank you all for kind of like diving in. You unearthed a lot in just a couple of minutes, and these are all just sort of part of the process, and acknowledging, addressing, looking at gaps, looking at this, looking at that, and hopefully if you're engaging in storytelling projects for social change, these are some of the considerations, these are the conversations that we think ought to be part of that process, and to be mindful about it. And just so you know, 3 of the case studies are actually field reports in Say It Forward. And so you can read, that's sort of a teaser. So you can read a little bit about like how some of the things you brought up, how they were addressed or not addressed, or how they were dealt with, because these are works in progress. So anyway, thank you for doing that. That's correct. There's the one about the school and the wall art. That was not
just in terms of the power of telling one's story. And this is in the social work domain, but I have a friend colleague who founded a grassroots organization, I think in the 1980s, to help families where where there's domestic violence. And when they were doing intakes, before they actually asked questions about it and asked people to tell their stories about domestic violence, there was very little reported. The incidence among women who actually told their stories reported went up 300%. After the first round of just telling their stories about the violence.
Wow. I just wanted to ask, are you as an interviewer obliged to report on crime that you meet during the interview? Like, you mean a rape case or murder even? We don't know, I mean, because according to European legislation, you are obliged.
Yeah, I mean, there's several. Do you want to take
I'm a mandated reporter. As a licensed clinical social worker, I'm a mandated reporter. So there are incidences. I don't know, Madeline,
Well, the question to me is if it's something in the past,
Yeah.
or something about to happen, or something recent, and I don't know how clear some of those
I don't know in oral history, because,
distinctions.
I mean, Madeline's a trauma specialist in social work.
Very good question.
There is actually there's a book called Oral History in the Law by John Neuenschwander that has a chapter about this. If you want to know more about the U.S. context, basically sometimes you are mandated and sometimes you're not. It's like generally a personal ethical question more than it is a legal question. But there are some places where you could have legal consequences for hearing of a crime in an oral history and not reporting it. And I want to just thank you all. This has been so rich. I know we're coming close to being out of time, but maybe we started a little late, so maybe we can take at least like 5 minutes for some questions.
That'd be great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I'd open it up for maybe other people's questions. There's so much here.
Yeah. And we'll definitely hang around too
regarding
after.
the cases, or just our general questions?
Just maybe general questions on the whole evening.
And maybe I could just say, I have to run out of here, but I am in New York, in Brooklyn. So if any of you want to tell Amy, you want to get in touch with me, and she'll give you a way to do that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, because I asked Amy permission to take 1 second to do this. My husband is a choral conductor who's doing a human rights choral project, and he's looking for singers. So there he is, if anybody's interested.
I didn't know the evening was about me, but when I heard that, I was thinking of older people anyway. But it was no, seriously speaking, if you're interested in singing about human rights, well, here.
Do you have to be like a trained singer? Is it for anybody?
You do, I mean, we provide MP3s to tell people that we already started rehearsals, so you have to really get involved into it, but we can speak in person.
Okay, so could just a few minutes, a few questions, kind of like we covered a lot of ground in this hour and a bit. So questions about the process, questions about voice of witness, say it forward, questions for Lauren, questions for Cliff.
Great, thank you. So we're here because we really want to get started on an oral history project, and of course we're new to the medium. And so the next step for us is understanding what is the process. I mean, I started reading the book, we're already in it, but what does that mean to begin to form and ask these difficult questions? And obviously it's going to be difficult for us to like not have guidance and support. And so does the Voice of Witness program offer some type of programming or support for people that are starting a nonprofit to address an issue of advocacy?
So you're starting a nonprofit, or you're starting an oral history project?
Okay, yeah, let me be clear. I'm going to be clear now. So this is Dr. Phyllis Tribble. She wrote a book, an incredible book called Texts of Terror. And this book details the stories of rape and gender-based violence in the Bible. And so it's literary criticism, a feminist literary criticism of how the gospel addresses stories of rape and gender-based violence. And so it's very clear that it's not in support of abusers, and it's not in support of remaining silent. And so as a survivor myself, and given the context of the political situation that we're in, it is very important to us to launch a nonprofit that will begin to address and collect stories of women and men who are survivors and even non-survivors of how they are feeling and reacting to the current political climate and how it has affected them to be in it. And so we have considered theater, we have considered short film, but because we're trying to get out quickly before the next election, I personally feel, and a lot of us feel, that we really need to start collecting story, because it's from there that we can begin to write a true screenplay and a true short film that will showcase how we have been feeling. Yeah.
Well, maybe I could just preface it by saying we do at Voice of Witness have a process we call Story Lab, and that usually gets opened up once every 2 years or so. And we basically put out a call and have people send in proposals. And then, there's a process through which we, decide who to invite for a fuller proposal, and then potentially becomes part of this incubation period where we do give that kind of support, training, get meetings, et cetera, and then a small, modest amount of funding to get started. But I would say, we have a whole lineup of projects already And so it's unlikely that I'm gonna do a story lab anytime soon. And just to say, most of our projects are not, we are the slow food version of all this stuff. It usually takes between 18 months and 5 years for a collection. So if you're interested in getting something out fast, it wouldn't be with us.
I would say, just to add on to that, we do consult with nonprofits around projects and kind of doing what we've been talking about now. But in this case, we could easily point you towards people who have embarked on not the same thing, but maybe addressing some of the things, issues that were there, great care, that have to be dealt with before you even get into the stories. Because you're in a hurry for the stories, but there's all this other stuff first. And at the very least, without a story lab and all the other stuff that I was talking about, we can maybe help steer you towards people who might be helpful to you. But I would say at the very least, start with a group of trusted advisors, and really it's like, okay, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? What's happening? Starting with that.
I can just quickly add that Groundswell, which is a network of oral historians and all kinds of people doing oral history for social change, is doing an online training that starts, I think, later this month, that I would recommend. And then on May 11th, we're doing a day of public trainings here that'll include workshops on trauma and ethics in oral history. That'll include workshops on participatory oral history for social change, introductory workshops on oral history. So I would say that that's a place, a easily accessible place to get some advising and training.
Great.
Yeah, Groundswell's awesome. Okay, two quick questions. We're gonna go all the way in the back, and then we're gonna come back here.
You said that there are several issues about aesthetics. Are there some questions that you find you come back to help you in guiding your own devising and process, catalytic questions or introspective questions?
I think for me, there's direct advocacy, and that sometimes gets expressed in a more, shall I say, propagandistic way, where the end goal of affecting some kind of change becomes more important. And I would say that for Voice of Witness, we fall on the less propagandistic side, because what we're more interested in, rather than, we love when our work gets taken up in the world, but we don't necessarily see ourselves as being frontline kind of advocates. We're not necessarily going at it from a perspective of we need to change people's actions. It's more about changing hearts and minds, I guess, might be one way to look at it, and then hoping that people then take that complexity and nuance and relatability of seeing a human in all their forms, all the flaws, everything, and understanding that people make contradictory choices, bad choices, but they're choices that you can kind of understand better because you understand a little bit more about their lives in total, rather than just the worst thing that they've done, or something that is easily put into some kind of box, but that you get a better sense of someone's whole life, the arc of their life, and that's why we put so much importance on the birth to now aspect of it, so that it isn't just that moment where somebody was affected by social injustice, but you get the backstory a little bit more, and that's kind of what we're going for.
Absolutely. Last question. We'll try to answer it as briefly as we can.
This is going to be fast, and it's kind of simple, but it's about ethics. I've been for 2 years.
Fast, simple ethics.
Yeah, I've been working 2 years on a project, and it's about a community and something that happened in the community. And I now am into editing a lot of the material. And when people mention other people in the community that have not been in the project negatively, I tend to edit that out. If they mention them, I put in the incident, but I edit out the name. If they mention people positively, I'm leaving the name in. Is that okay?
Interesting.
If they say this person really helped me in school and they were the best, and you know.
I mean, are you asking like what we do?
Well, do you think that that's all right to lead ethically? If this is an ethical question, because these people, you know, one guy talks about his sister. We've got her picture from the annual. We're doing something online with it. Can I use her picture? I haven't talked to her. I got his permission in his name.
Wow. Well,
I mean, I guess part
Because I
of
don't
it
have
is
contact with her.
part of it is that, you know, in the stories that end up in our collection, people always talk about other people in their lives.
Right.
And so, you know, if there's something negative, but it's part of that person's experience, what I would generally do is anonymize whoever they're talking about, give them another name.
That's what I'm doing if it's negative.
But it's really frustrating. I mean, I think it's really frustrating when you have somebody. I did a fantastic interview last weekend, and the woman doesn't want this. It was just for the family. The woman does not want this disseminated, and I really want to include this in something, and I have to let it go.
Yeah.
You know, I think too, if you're looking at, I mean, these are community members who are going to be a part and read this, and it's still very much an active kind of a history. And to feel like you're, even though it makes, you know, like you're publicly calling somebody out.
Even if it's positive?
No, I mean, like if you're saying it's like somebody, you know, leaving in the stuff that's negative and maybe, you know, or quote unquote negative, I think that should definitely stay in there, right?
But without the names, definitely.
Probably.
Yeah.
Although you could also, one thing that you could, simple, right? This is simple.
Sorry.
The idea that, I think sort of like, and then person X, it's like I think that person should have a name.
I can give you an example. I did a project for the Columbia Emeritus Institute, and some of the professors I interviewed decided they wanted to edit certain things out, and the director of the institute said no. She wants, this is what they said, she wants everything there. So, I mean, it's out of my hands, so it's not up to me, but
yeah.
it is an ethical dilemma.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what I mean is, like, just to clarify, it's like, if you didn't want to say, and Tom Smith, you know, did this, what if Tom Smith was not Tom Smith, but had a different name?
Or
right? So we associate it with like an actual person who said and did this, but we're not, you know, saying, yeah.
I'm sorry, but I've been thinking again to something I was thinking when we were meeting over here. Always, to what end?
Mm-hmm.
What are the consequences?
Absolutely.
What are you really hoping to accomplish in light of what the need is, not just your own inclination, your own interest, which of course is important to drive you to do the work, otherwise you can just go to bed. But I think it's critically important because the implications of nature for the community, for the individual, the community, and its future worth. When Lauren gave that example just now, Columbia really wants its history archived, and the history of these emeriti people. So that has its own box.
Yeah.
And this is a different box.
Yeah.
And this was a different box. Australia.
Yeah.
Where are we going to go in Australia? So I really feel that.
Yeah.
That's really major.
No, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. I mean, the impact is massive.
What
and
for?
and I think we do need to end here, right?
Yeah, no, I wanted to, you know, I really appreciate the way that you framed even the aesthetic choices that we make have to take into account the ethical and the legal and also the political aims of our work. And I think this is all a really helpful way to start thinking through some of that. So thank you all so much for coming. Again, if you want to be on our mailing list or you're not, I'll put the sign-up sheet outside. Buy the book. It's here. And thank you all finally so much.